You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards-Nagel, and Teighlor Polindo.
Starting a 3-part series based on Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. And this book was published in 2021. Some of you might have read it. It is basically an encyclopedia of all things, relationships, emotions, etc. And what we thought it would be fun to do is to kind of team up against each other.
It's a combo for and against.
Yeah, so we thought we would select chapters and assign them to each of us, but who was doing the selecting were the other two. So for this episode, Meredith is going to be responding on chapter 10 in Atlas of the Heart. And Teighlor and I picked out chapter 10 for her.
Every chapter title that I would read, I'd compare it to you and just what sparked me. And I don't know if you want to read the whole chapter title, but a lot of them, I'm like, I feel like I watched these things in your life and watched you walk through them.
So chapter 10 in Atlas of the Heart, this is about the places we go when the heart is open. Love, lovelessness, heartbreak, trust, self-trust, betrayal, defensiveness, flooding, and hurt. Quite a list. Yeah. So now Teighlor and I, we're ganging up on you. We picked chapter 10, and I'll tell you why I did it.
Okay.
I've always thought you struck me as someone with an open heart.
Oh,
and I thought
that's really
that
nice.
openness put you in a unique, vulnerable position. It was like the greatest strength, but one of the things that would make your life very rich, but is a little dangerous about you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little better about this already because, wait, I'll tell you my first note in a second. What were you going to say?
Okay. No, I was just saying that's the danger of having an open heart is that vulnerability.
I literally wrote a stream of consciousness notes on just preparing for this. And the first sentence I have is, when I started reading about love, I thought, damn it, fuck you guys for giving me stuff that rips out my emotional guts. So that's where I begin. But really, to get into this, because I know you mentioned the sections, if you will, this chapter, right? Love, lovelessness, heartbreak, trust, self-trust, betrayal, defensiveness, flooding, hurt. So my first question was why to Brené Brown? Why put love in a chapter with betrayal and hurt?
Oh.
And it almost turned me off. At first, I was going through it because I read through it a few times. Then I realized, damn, in real life, life well lived, in my opinion, if we have one, we have its opposite. So we have to dive into it. And that scares me, but also makes me proud, could be the word, or proud and excited that I want the best of life so much in my relationships that I have gone through being super defensive and hate that about myself or have felt heartbreak or all these things. But yeah, my first note is screw you guys because you know what you did and I'm just going to cry a lot. So are you ready?
So one of the quotes from Brené Brown says, we cultivate love and we allow our most vulnerable and powerful help to be seen and known. My question is, how do you make yourself deeply seen and known? Personal. How does Meredith do it?
I just want to go with my gut answer on this, which is I think the older I'm getting, the less afraid of being ugly I am. And so that means if I am being defensive, I can say that in the moment. And I'm not as afraid to do it because I want to grow from it more than anything. I think you've told me this before, Dr. K, but I remember you saying something to the effect of the more you're married, the more risky it is. The more you're committed to a person, the riskier it gets, the scarier it gets. And I did not get that at first when you said it. The more I commit and the more I show my ugly and try and give myself to my partner in my life, the more terrifying this becomes.
Yeah.
But the more I want it.
And then that's how you cultivate the love, right? So there's the answer.
Yeah.
Bravery.
Boom. Yes. Okay.
Let me jump in.
Teach me.
Okay.
What is this chapter? Break it down for me.
Okay. So basically, to me, this chapter is like an emotional map. It's like a landscape. And it simultaneously scares the shit out of me and I want more of it. And it starts with the best thing, love. It draws you in, but then it just breaks you up at the end because you're like, damn it, yes. So essentially, Brene Brown in the section about love is describing love as this powerful force that connects us to other people. And she emphasizes that it's not just a feeling, but it requires action, being vulnerable. It requires trust, which is scary. And it requires commitment. She quotes a lot of bell hooks in a book called All About Love in this section. I put it in my Amazon cart to purchase and read it next month. That's my goal from reading this chapter. I'm sure, probably. It's going to be great. The thing that blew my mind starting to read this, and Teighlor can laugh and I could admit it here, is when I was preparing for this, I read this quote by bell hooks and I started crying and I sent a picture of myself looking like a hot mess to Teighlor. And I literally was like, screw you for giving me this. I hate you. Essentially, the quote leans to tell us that everywhere in life we learn that love is a super important thing, right? But we're bombarded by its failure. And I was like, I read that like a couple times. I'm like, yeah. But then I had this moment where I was like, no, I'm trying to create something in my life that isn't an example of that for my family the best I can. And that makes me really excited and happy. Anyway, so love. Yeah. So essentially, it's not just a feeling, it's an action, which I like. And she says, like, she thinks love, the definition of love is better left to the poets, right? Leave it to the artists.
Yeah.
We're so research-based here in this conversation, but let it be that way. And at the end of her explanation of this, she says, I think attempting to better understand ourselves and each other is essential, but so is mystery. And for me, I want to leave love there. I think it's so vast and so big. And like she says in this area, it's a force that connects us, right? And we need it. But there's mystery to it. And I like that. I don't know if I'll ever put my finger on what it is.
This is reminding me, when you were tracing the landscape of this chapter, it reminded me of something Brene Brown said earlier in her career, where when she started interviewing people about love and belonging, they would always talk about heartbreak. They wouldn't start with love and belonging. They would always talk about that. Which
exactly.
I think is interesting. So there's an interesting play between the two in this chapter that kind of helps define the other in light of the other thing.
Yeah, which I don't want. I don't want to know heartbreak because I know love, or love and know that heartbreak's coming. And so the next area is lovelessness, which is a very short area. I'm not going to get too much into it, but essentially lovelessness I took from this area is it's refusing to stand up for your own beliefs, weakens you personally as a person, but also collectively as a community, whatever community you're in. So not having love in you, with you, or an action of you is essentially weakening you as a person. So thinking that you're so brave or so tough because you don't have this gentle part of yourself, it's the opposite, I think. So then
okay, so I want to talk about heartbreak for a second. And one of the things that I think is interesting, and you both are, I would call young mothers, meaning you have young children and you are young, in my view anyway. One of the things we've talked about is when you have small children, there's this interesting connection between the mother and the father. I'm just talking about the mother connection. But there's this connection where they're somewhat of an extension of yourself, but they're also an extension of your heart. So when they get hurt, you get hurt.
Oh my God.
Or when they're at risk, you're at risk. And I was thinking about, it says every time we love, we risk heartbreak. And I thought, before I had children, I didn't know this side of life and how much it would expand my heart, but also at the same time make me feel like more vulnerable than ever.
Yes. So that retired priest that she talks about in this section, Joe Reynolds, he says the loss of innocence of your child can be heartbreak. Or I wrote here a note for myself this week. We had to pull a splinter out of my daughter's foot. And seeing that she didn't understand, as she was saying, like, it hurts. And then afterwards, like, she wiped her own tears and she said, I'm okay now. I'm okay now. But this moment of seeing her, like, this part of her change broke my heart because she didn't know why she was in pain. I know it's a small thing. And I can think about it like, oh, I know she's fine. Yeah, but to know it was the pain of that, to see that is bizarre. Because I've seen her fall and get hurt. And part of me is, oh, she can get right back up. That's right. Like, it's part of life. My husband and I were talking about it after she went to bed that night. And we're like, why was that so awful?
Yeah.
I'm holding her down. She knew she didn't like what we were doing. That one of us had to hold her down. The other one had to take it out. It's because the skin grew over the splinter. It was a whole process. And as a young mom, yeah, I'm nervous for seeing the innocence get lost. That makes me nervous. I think that'll break my heart.
Do you have to have lovelessness and heartbreak? Is that what she's comparing and contrasting in these dual things that, for trust, self-trust, and betrayal, you have to have one to be able to enjoy or fully appreciate the other?
This is what Joe Reynolds says, who she quotes here, is that heartbreak happens when love is lost in your life. So you had to have love to have heartbreak. You have to have risked that to get to that place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, heartbreak isn't, again, like the typical heartbreak we think of as the end of an intimate relationship. It can be the death of a loved one, the loss of the innocence of your child, right?
The clarification they gave, which was heartbreak is not just a big disappointment or a failure. So it was related to love in the way that there was no longer that either simplicity or loving connection that previously existed. It's not just, oh, I'm super bummed, therefore I'm heartbroken.
It's poetic, but you have to have given some of your heart for it to be broken.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have risked that part of yourself to get there in the first place.
Do you have to experience heartbreak to experience love?
I think we live on planet Earth, so I want to say yes. With human beings,
I don't know if you have to experience it, but you have to risk it to experience love. You have to risk that heartbreak could occur, which kind of goes to the point that you were making earlier, Meredith. This idea that the longer we are in these long-term relationships, we're more all in than before, because now you don't have just one child with this person. You have two children or three children. Now you have not 30 years, but 35 years. So you have your whole history. At my point of being married 35 years is most of my life has been with him.
Yeah.
All in.
Yeah. I was struck a lot by these two areas from Joe Reynolds, who she quotes a lot in this section as a retired priest. And he says, to love with any level of intensity and honesty is to become vulnerable. I used to tell couples getting married that the only thing I could tell them with certainty was that they would hurt each other. To love is to know the loss of love. Heartbreak is unavoidable. So there answers your question, I think. Unless we choose not to love at all. And a lot of people just do that, he says. Yeah, maybe there are people out there that don't feel heartbreak, but have they really actually risked loving in their life? I would maybe argue no.
Yeah, so you could play it safe and never have heartbreak, but you would risk never having loved.
Yeah. And that's not worth it. Maybe somebody listening is like, screw you, you don't know. It's worth it to me to live like this and protect myself under a rock. Okay, fine, do that. But I think we've argued in many conversations on this podcast and just with each other and life is we're made for relationships. We're communal people made for relationships. And thus, I think if we're made for that, then we're made for love in some capacity. Yeah.
So let's dig in a little bit on the defensiveness topic. Brené Brown says, at its core, defensiveness is a way to protect our ego and a fragile self-esteem. Fragile self-esteem is when failures, mistakes, and imperfections decrease our self-worth. But the opposite of that fragile self-esteem is grounded confidence, accepting our imperfections. The reason I wanted to jump to this topic, Meredith,
because I suck at it. Go ahead.
You sound like you are able to embrace your imperfections based on what you earlier said in this episode. How do you do that?
I think way more now in my life. And maybe my child has taught me that. And committing to a partner, because it doesn't have to be a child. My first notes on defensiveness said, she writes, it makes sense. The way we're defensive is where we're fragile. And I wrote, oh, hell no. I said, this is so hard for me to swallow because I know I can go here really quickly. But I'm learning through conversations with us on this podcast, through reading this, that this emotion, this reaction of defensiveness blocks me from meaningful change in my life. And learning that and actually seeing it happen, like in action, so many years passing and growing as a person, that the more defensive I am, the more blocked from growth I am. It makes me want to say that thing. I think we talked about this in an episode before. I was like, can you just say it out loud?
You keep saying over time. So is it maturity? Is it decision making? What would you say?
I think she gives strategies, which I've taken before and I like. There's 3 of them here. But for me personally, I've used her strategies, but also I think I've realized I want more than anything to have a successful life. I want to have a good life, a rich life, not just financially speaking in that way, like a full life. And if I'm going to do it tag teaming with another person that I've promised to tag team with, then I have to address this issue in myself because I think I could take us down if I don't. Maybe that's
So
what
it's
it
like
is.
driven by commitment then.
Maybe, yeah. I think there's an element of that. And even in my other relationships, not just my husband, but I think of my sister. Her and I could get super quick, I think, at defending ourselves in front of each other. And that's the point of that anymore. I don't care so much about being fragile as I did when I was in my earlier 20s.
Or being imperfect, I think, is what you mean.
Yeah. I wanted so bad 10 years ago, not to be right, but to know I was on the right path. I was going the right way. And so I had to stick to my guns.
Mm-hmm.
Where now I'm doing my best. But if new information comes and it could create better opportunity or growth or happiness, I'm okay with being wrong, I think. Yeah. I found it interesting that in their research, it was hard for people to remember being defensive.
Oh, yeah.
It's as if the brain is offline. I don't know if you can relate with that feeling just gone. I'm like, yeah, I'm not like that. Hell no, I'm not like that. But people were in the research were able to remember their physical movements of being defensive, right? You get stiff, you shut off, you look away, you avoid, you fight, the crossing the arms, the heavy breathing, whatever it is. And to think about her strategies is to do the reverse of those things, right? Is to physically open up your hands, to ask someone to repeat themselves so you listen.
I like how she said that in that chapter. What did she say again?
She physically opens her palms. She says to focus on her physical response to being defensive. And I relate. When I want to defend, I stop listening and I start to prepare what I'm going to say next. But if I focus on physically how my body is in that moment, then I got my shoulders, physically open up my palms. Is that what you're talking about?
Okay, I found it. It's on page 197. My strategy is to open my palms, even if my hands are just hanging by my side or on my lap, and actually say, I'm sorry, can you say that again? I really want to understand.
Yeah. So I split that up into two strategies, the physical opening of your palms and actually opening your mouth to say, can you say that again? I want to understand. To say that to somebody, I want to understand what you're saying to me when I just want to throat punch you. It's not really, right? It's the defensive. That's on the attack version, or when I want to prove that you're wrong. Yeah. Oh, I wrote that. I hate that she said that when you're defensive, you stop listening. I didn't like that. I was like, no, that means that not only does the defensive behavior block your growth, but then it reduces your ability to hear people that you love and that love you. And we're all assuming in this conversation that we're talking about people that we have good relationships with, healthy. So I was like, damn, that means I'm missing things people in my life are saying to me because I'm blocking the ability to grow myself, but also to hear someone that is close to me.
Your brain went offline, right?
Yeah, totally.
That's pretty interesting about the brain going offline. I like that.
Similar to being flooded, defensiveness and flooding.
Yeah, I think she talks about that too. Flooding we've talked about before, and we've referenced, and she does too, the Gottman Institute, right? The definition by the Gottman Institute is a sensation of feeling psychologically and physically, so both, overwhelmed during conflict. So it makes it virtually impossible to have productive problem-solving discussion. But I think you have to know yourself to know if this is happening, right? Our bodies have nervous systems. Eventually, they're going to go to self-preservation or attack. And it's best to recognize yourself if the flooding's happening. You really have people say, I want to get mad. I say things I don't mean. That's what makes me think about this. My partner says things and then they're like, I didn't mean that. You have to get to know yourself to know when to pause.
Yeah.
But pause, not completely stop. Because I think that's the key with flooding that I learned is if you want success in your relationship, you can't just say, I'm flooded, done. Conversation over, conflict over. Conflict doesn't end then. And so you have to be able to come back. I think that's the biggest thing I took from flooding is at some point you have to know yourself well enough to say, I need a timeout. And if somebody asks for this from you, give it to them. Don't force the fight.
I don't want to as a communicator.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in the same kind of household Brene grew up in. And as in the book, hey, get back in here. She says, hey, get back in here and fight with me culture. Is how she grew up. You got to get back in here. You can't just leave and stop the conversation. And I had to really learn that because my preference is no, we're going to get through it. We're not getting flooded. That's just a cop out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Isn't that funny? I relate with that. Yeah. Come on. Huh?
And then one of the things I had to learn as an adult and as a married person is you can demand that. But like you said, Meredith, People get flooded. They're offline. You're not going to have the conversation. Keep trying to have it. Get back in here. Come on. We're going to have this conversation. But I had to really learn to not expect that. And that I was not going to ever get the productive conversation no matter how much I insisted.
And I think of two things with that, which I relate with that sensation of, come on, let's just get through it. Let's just do it. But the two things I've learned from this are, one, if you're that person that wants to push through so hard and that person on the other side of the table can't, you're just going to have the fucking conversation again. It's not working. They're done. Okay, you want to do this 5 times? Okay, you have to accept that this is a real thing. Or you're just going to keep repeating. You're going to feel like you're insane because you have to repeat conversation. And then the second thing I learned was what scared me about it and why I want to push through is that then you don't reconcile. If you get flooded or I get flooded, then we can't reconcile. And I can't stand that because of the way I grew up. I need that. I need the reconciliation because I didn't see it. And that terrifies me so much, to feel flooded, because then I have to admit it, because I know I do, but I don't want to say I am. But then to commit to coming back and actually doing it. So what I take from this is, if you're a person that's being flooded, or you see your partner flooded, and you recognize that's happening, either side of the table, call for a pause. But in that moment, I need a commitment of when you're going to come back. Maybe it's in 24 hours, maybe it's in 10 minutes, but something that's not just, we're just pausing. Because I know I will lose my mind if it's just, I just can't do this right now.
Yeah. And remember something the Gottman Institute points out, which is when you're taking that break, it's not go sit in the other room and stew about the conflict.
Yeah.
It's actually get yourself back online.
Yes, yes.
And so it's not having a beer in the other room and going, you know what? I'm right about everything. They're wrong about everything.
I know, right?
I'm so pissed. That's not productive. Not that I would know personally about that.
I love that. Okay, I want to wrap up 2 quick things. Trust and betrayal. If you've ever thought to yourself, how do I know I can trust somebody? How can I examine if I'm trustworthy? She gets into this tool. Look up Dare to Lead by Brene Brown and look up her braving acronym. I'm sure you could Google it and find a lot of info on it.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
Yes. The betrayal was, and I love that she does this, and I thought Teighlor would appreciate. She starts betrayal with a quote by the Hunger Games. It says, for there to be betrayal, there would have to have been trust first. Movie quote, Teighlor. Love Teighlor. Have to shout out. It's just crazy. She talks about it's so painful because it's a violation of trust. Betrayal only can happen in a relationship where you expect trust from another person. And as she explains it, it can feel like the ground is given away. Most of these happen with romantic partners, friends, family members, whatever. But what blew my mind about this too is she talks about different types of betrayal. Romantic, institutional betrayal, she talks about, and then she gets into a section from her Dare to Lead book and explains essentially anywhere there's betrayal, it's government, church, sports, school, right? But the family one blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I'm not sure I'm okay with relating to this. It made me very uncomfortable. She says, you find in a family, it's more important to protect the reputation of the system, those in power, than it is to protect the human dignity of an individual. You can be certain of the following problems will happen. Shame is systemic. Complicity is part of the culture. Money and power trump ethics. Accountability is dead. Control and fear are management tools. And there's a trail of devastation and pain. And I hate that I read that, and I know I'm not the only one, but it bothered me. It made me want to think, well, how do we do the opposite? How do I do the opposite of this? And it's difficult.
That's a great question as young mothers to ask themselves, is to say, how do I not do those things to learn the opposite thing, which is what the chapter's about.
Yeah, I can get it to some degree through culture and generations, and it's not to push all this blame or whatever, right? But she talks about it's possible to heal this, right? But betrayal needs to be rare to move forward in relationship. In my past relationship choices, be it even some friendships I've lost, not just romantic, you allow so much of it in your spirit that you don't realize this needs to be a very rare thing in a relationship. Even she says that in the research, they find that the only way back from it is to be accountable, make amends, and have action. And that's really hard to do because then it moves you straight back into being defensive, especially if you've done the betraying.
That's the only way to come back from betrayal.
Yeah, she says 3 things: to be accountable, make amends, and have action. She says it's not possible unless you acknowledge the pain and potentially trauma that you've caused somebody. And I look back at even I'd say like my first marriage, for example, that had to end because there was no acknowledgement of betrayal. None.
Yeah.
There's no moving forward with that.
Yeah.
And it was like a little light bulb moment of, oh yeah, because I have my moments where I'm like, God, I'm so much better now in my life and I'm fine. But moving through to get to this point, you have this, did I fail? Should I have pushed through all those things? But you need action. And that takes a lot to move through this.
Isn't that validation though too?
Yes.
I listened to that. That's validation. The relationship had to end.
Yeah. And that's okay. And I think if you are thinking to yourself, you're trying to like make all these excuses of like why to stay or why to continue the friendship, or even like she gives examples, this is commune work or in a religious setting or whatever. If there aren't those 3 things, accountability, amends, action, and acknowledgement, the action is acknowledging the pain. I think it's okay. The moving forward is moving away from that relationship.
Yeah. I think it sounds like validation to me.
Definitely.
Because I think you can look back on a divorce or a broken relationship or friendship or whatever has been broken, and you could talk yourself into saying, oh, maybe it should have not been that way, or maybe something else should have happened, or I should have done something. But I think if the research shows that certain things have to happen to get it to be back together, and those things don't happen, then we're not surprised.
Yeah. So I would say that for me, this chapter 10 is a powerful reminder of how important it is to keep our heart open, which is funny that I made that as a last note and you said that. You saw that in me. Really nice. I like that. But it's a good reminder to keep our hearts open, even if it feels risky and when it feels risky, because it won't just be if, it will. And as this openness is key to experiencing like just massive joy and fulfillment in your life, this comes from love, belonging, and connection, which is, I feel like, what this whole chapter is about.
Yeah. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
Let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.